Okay, so what we're looking at right now is 4.3 congruent triangles. Now, when we're talking about congruent triangles, it involves a certain number of things. And the number of things that we're looking at are the angles and the sides. And the way that I've formulated this little note diagram here is the definition of corresponding angles and corresponding sides is the same. It goes right here. It's the same position in polygons with the same number of sides. Okay? So you have to compare squares to squares. You have to compare triangles to triangles. You have to have the same number of sides when you're comparing congruent or corresponding things like that. Okay? And so the next piece here, this congruent polygons is saying that polygons are called congruent. Okay? We can only call them this if and only if, which is a biconditional, their corresponding angles and sides are congruent. So, this is the key piece right here. It has to be all of them, because it's only if. Okay? So all of them must be congruent. Okay? And so when we go down to this little chart that we've got here for the properties of congruent polygons, what we're looking at is two triangles here, and they have corresponding angles because they're the same figure and they have the same number of sides. Okay? And so what we're going to do is we are going to outline the angles. And so as you can see, they give us this congruence statement. So this is called a congruence. It's called a congruence statement. So it's saying that these two things, these two triangles are congruent. What does that mean for us? It means they have corresponding angles. So if they're congruent, that means all the pieces are the same. So what I can say is angle A is congruent to angle D. Okay? I can also say that angle B, which has 2 marks, is congruent to angle E. I can also say that angle C is congruent to angle F. The angles have the same number of marks. That's the key to this. The angles have the same number of marks. And so it's really just a matching game because F and C have 3 marks each, so they go together. D and A have 1 mark each, and B and E have 2 marks each. It doesn't matter how they're turned. Okay? It doesn't matter how the figures are turned. So when I look at corresponding sides, here's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at side AB. Well, what does side AB go with? It has 1 tick mark, so it's going to go with side DE. Notice, A and D are in the first position. B and E are in the second position. So when I use the first and second AB, it has to go with the first and second DE. Okay? So now, my next side with 2 tick marks is going to be BC, which is going to be congruent to my 2 tick marks EF. BC, EF. Notice how these things are starting to come together. My third side, which is going to be CA, is going to be congruent to, so CA, first or last and first, is going to be congruent to FD. Last and first. Last and first. Okay? So, the sides have the same number of tick marks. Okay? So that's how this works. So when we go down to the second example, once again, I have this congruence statement down here. You can try this one on your own. This would be a great time to pause it and see if you can do this on your own. I'm going to roll straight through and I'm going to give you the answers, but you can pause it right here and it'll be like you're doing an example in class. And if you have questions, go ahead and ask those in your notes and continue to copy down the example. I'm going to go straight through. So if PQRS is with WXYZ, I know that means that angle P is congruent to angle Q and angle, not angle Q. It's going to go with one from the other shape, so that's going to be angle W. So the first goes with the first. And angle Q is going to go with angle X. Okay. Angle R is going to be congruent to angle Y. And angle S is going to go with angle Z. Okay? Now, sides. It's going to be difficult because we have two sides that have one tick mark and two sides that have two tick marks. So we're going to use the letters. Use the order of the letters. So, PQ is going to be congruent to WX, and QR is going to be congruent to XY, and RS is going to be congruent to, last two letters, YZ. And so that means that our last side is SP, not ESP. SP is going to be congruent to last and first, ZW. Okay? That's exactly how this works, guys. Okay, it's a matching game. It's really just a system of saying these sides in the same order. Okay? So when we name polygons, we must go in consecutive order. For example, if I have polygon PQRS, I could call it QRSP, or I could call it RSPQ. I could not call it RPQS. I could not call it QSPR. Okay? I can't call those things because it's not in order. I could also not call it QSP because that's not all the letters. So, I must use all letters. All vertices, letters. And I must go in order. Okay? Now, in example 1, we're going to name some congruent polygons. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at these two, this hexagon, and I've pulled out two of the shapes, RST and ZXY. And so if RST is congruent to XYZ, I'm going to identify all pairs of congruent parts. So I'll start. And if you want to pause it and fill it in, you can. According to this, R and X go together. So angle R is congruent to angle X. Also, angle S is congruent to angle Y. And also, angle T is congruent to angle Z. And that means that RS is congruent to XY. Gotta be careful with my drawings here. And that means that ST is congruent to first, or that's the second and third, so that's going to be YZ. Making sure to label correctly. So YZ is here, So that means that I've got RS I've talked about ST, so TR is going to be congruent to last and first, so that's going to be ZX. Okay? So you guys, this wasn't even marked, and I was able to pull out these congruent statements using the letters that were actually here. Okay? So, your turn. Example 1b. I want you to identify all pairs of corresponding congruent parts simply using this statement here. Okay? So pause it, see if you can do this. If you have questions about it, ask them in the margin. I am going to go ahead and roll straight on through this. Okay, guys? Now, let's look. If I say I've got these two things which are congruent, I can say angle L is congruent to angle E, and angle M is congruent to angle F, which also means that angle N is congruent to angle G, which also gives me angle P is congruent to angle H. Okay? I've got 4 congruent statements because I have 4 different corners. Okay? Now, the sides, a little bit trickier, but we're still not afraid. LM is congruent to EF, and that means that MN is congruent to FG, which means that NP is congruent to GH, which gives me PL is congruent to HE. It's a system, guys. It's a system. We're going straight down the line. Now, how do we use this? This is the beauty of it. This is the good stuff. We're using it now. Let's take a quick look at finding the value of x. We are given that these two triangles are congruent. So what this means is that E and G are congruent, F and F are congruent, H and H are congruent. Okay? It makes sense. So when I say to find the value of x, I'm going to use this diagram. Well, if this is a 90-degree angle here, and these form a linear pair, I know that 6x minus 12 plus 90 is going to be a straight angle. Well, when I start to solve for these things, I get that 6x minus 12 is equal to 90. Well, it makes sense because together they're both 180. So I'm going to add 12. So I get 6x is equal to 102. I'll divide both sides by 6, and I get x is equal to 17. Okay? Now, I want to find the measure of GFH. Well, let's think about this for a second, guys. If E and G are the same, here's what this means. They're the same. So really, that means that this one is also 21.6 degrees. Well, if I have all three angles of a triangle are 180, I've got 90 plus 21.6 plus this angle F here, I'm going to call it Y. That's going to be equal to 180. Well, when I start subtracting, I've got 90 I've got 21.6 plus whatever my angle measure is equal to 90. I'll subtract 21.6 from both sides. I end up with Y is going to be equal to 68.4. Okay? So the measure of angle GFH is 68.4 degrees because all of them add up to 180. Okay, guys? I use the congruent parts to know that those two are equal. Now, here's an example that you can try on your own. Try it on your own. I'm going to roll through it doing the example, but if you have questions, write them in your notes. First, what I can do is I can say ABC is congruent to DEF. So I know that A and D go together, B and E go together, and C and F go together. Well, when I need to find the value of x, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, what goes with AB? Well, if AB are the first two letters, then I know that AB is congruent to DE, which means that 2x minus 2 is going to be equal to 6. See how I did that there, guys? So that means 2x is equal to 8. So x is equal to 4. Alright, so you see how that goes. Now, let's find the measure of angle F. Well, since I marked this already, F is marked with 2 tick marks. And this one's marked with 2 tick marks. Unfortunately, I don't have this angle. But what I do know is that this is 53. Well, if I have 53 and 90, I've got 90 plus 53 plus the measure of angle C is equal to 180. Okay, so that means that 143 plus the measure of angle C is equal to 180. So I'll subtract 143. Measure of angle C is 37. Well, if this is 37, then that means that this is 37. See how that works, guys? Okay, so that's the basics of using these corresponding parts to find out the measures of angles and to find out values of x. That's it for right now, guys. I've got a second piece of this video that's going to be a little proof, and you can watch that one on your own, but this is the basics. Make sure when you come to class, you've watched this video. Alright, guys? Thanks for watching.